Hello and welcome to another episode of Katie the Science Lady. My name is Mrs. Jacobson, and our topic today is cell differentiation. So let's learn together. Okay, let's get started. So today our topic is cell differentiation. When we talk about cell differentiation, what we're really talking about is how did our bodies get so complex? We know we started out as the product of one egg and one sperm. When they become fertilized, it creates a single cell called a zygote. Now this single cell has to become the trillions of cells in our body. So how did that happen? The answer is it starts with stem cells. So as you can see here, we've got a stem cell. And that stem cell has a couple of things it can do. It can either replicate itself and create more stem cells, or it can change by altering its genes, turning genes on and turning genes off, and change into one of the hundreds of other cell types we have in our body. It can turn into epithelial cells like we see here. It can turn into blood cells. It can turn into neurons or nerve cells. It can turn into egg cells, sperm cells, anything else you can think of. Epithelial cells are one of the main types that a stem cell will turn into. Epithelial cells, they line many of our organs. Epithelial cells make up our skin. They're very, very prevalent in our body. So there's their main function. They cover body surfaces and they line our organs. They're usually flat or column-shaped because that kind of helps it form a nice little layer. So either they're flat going across this way to create our skin cells. If you take a look at your hand, you can see those overlapping patterns. Or they may be column-shaped like this to form a nice thick protective layer for our organs. The shape and function of the epithelial cells depend on the location. Again, flat normally to kind of form a nice layer on the outside of something. The thicker column-shaped epithelial cells are typically more of your protective layers. We have a couple of examples here. Over here we've got a close-up under the microscope of our skin cells. And over here we've got lining. You can see those nice thick protective layers in the lining of one of our organs here. Next up we have some muscle cells. We know that muscles cover all of our bones. They help us move. They help us stay upright, which is kind of a big deal. So they contain fibers that allow them to contract, which is what happens when you flex a muscle. So you can notice the bicep is going to contract. That causes it to pop up. And that allows my forearm to move towards my shoulder. They also contain many mitochondria for energy. Mitochondria are a type of organelle that's a kind of specialized little machine in our cells that are going to turn sugar, essentially, into energy in the form of something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Down here we've got a picture and we can take a look. There are different units in our muscle fibers. Like I said, when you flex like your muscles, you contract those muscle fibers together. And to do that, you need a lot of energy, which is why when you're working out or you're running or playing a sport, you need to make sure you have good sources of energy in your diet so that you can use those mitochondria to their greatest extent and get enough energy to power. Except we have nerve cells. Stem cells can turn into nerve cells. They are really, really important because they're going to be carrying all of the electrical impulses and signals through your body. So because of this, they have these long, thin fiber projections that cause impulses to be carried very, very quickly from one place to another. So say I'm cooking and I set my hand down on my stove. Sometimes I can't tell if my stove is on, which is not a great thing. If it's hot, the nerves or the neurons in my hand are going to send a signal to my brain to tell me that's hot, I shouldn't have my hand on it. My brain will send then impulses back to my hand so that the muscles in my arm can contract and move my hand away from the hot surface. They make up the brain, the nerves, and the spinal cord, which are your whole nervous system is designed to send all these impulses through your body to make sure that you have all the information you need to do the things you need to do. We have a picture here of our neuron. We've got our axon, which is that nice long projection in the middle. Those can be incredibly, incredibly long. Dendrite's job is to grab information or impulses, bring it through the axon, and pass it along through the axon terminals at the end over here. Over here we've got a nice stylized picture of of neurons. I just thought it looked kind of cool. Something else that our stem cells can turn into are blood cells. Now, when we think of blood cells, you think of what we've got in the background here, which are red blood cells. That's not the only kind of blood cell we have. Sure, we do have red blood cells, and their job is to carry oxygen from one part of the body to the other. It's called gas exchange, and it gets rid of our carbon dioxide as well. They have no nucleus, and they have something called hemoglobin. It's a protein that is going to be used to bind oxygen to itself. So our red blood cells have lots and lots of hemoglobin packed into them so that they can carry more oxygen for us, which means we can be more efficient. They're flat and thin because if you have something that's flatter and thinner, you increase the surface area. Now think back to middle school math. You've got a nice flat surface, that's a good chunk of area, and the thinner it is, the easier it is for things to pass through that membrane and go into the cell. So we have easier time for our oxygen to get into our blood cells if they're flat and thin. If they were rounded and bigger, it'd be more difficult to get that oxygen in and the carbon dioxide out. We also have white blood cells. Now, white blood cells, they're going to be your defenders. They're going to be there to protect you from bacteria and viruses, anything that infiltrates your body. They have a nucleus, but they don't have hemoglobin. White blood cells aren't going to carry our oxygen. Instead, they're going to be there to protect us from different kinds of invaders for our body. We have a couple examples up here. We have our erythrocytes, which are red blood cells. And then we have many different kinds of white blood cells, like monocytes, eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils, and lymphocytes. They're all white blood cells. Platelets here are another type of, another portion of the blood, I should say, but they're not red blood cells or white blood cells. The final type of cell we're going to talk about today are gametes. These are actually sex cells, or sperm and egg cells. This is something else that your stem cells can be turned into. Sperm cells, they're tiny, but they have many, many mitochondria. Again, remember, mitochondria equals energy, or ATP energy. And that makes sense. Sperm have to travel very, very far to find an egg, so that means that they need more energy to complete that journey. Egg cells, in contrast, are very large, and they have lots of nutrients. Once a sperm meets an egg, that egg is going to have to survive kind of on its own for a while before it's going to get nutrients from the mom's body. So it needs to have nutrients inside the egg itself to help that zygote or single-celled cell survive. Down here we can see we've got sperm and egg cells. When they come together, it creates a zygote. That's just basically a fancy word for one single cell that has 23 chromosomes, or half the genetic information from mom and half the genetic information from dad. That will eventually turn into an embryo, which looks more like a fetus or a baby that we know of. Over here is a delightful picture. That contrasts the size between the egg and the sperm cells. Typically there are thousands, millions of sperm cells compared to just one or two egg cells. So this is more of what you would see, and this is a microscopic image. It is not fake. I get asked that a lot. Is that real, miss? Yes, it's real. So let's recap. Today we learned that stem cells are an important part of our early development as a zygote because they can turn into any of the one of hundreds of different cell types that we have in our human body. They could become nerve cells and help us to think and react to stimuli. They could become blood cells and help us to move oxygen through our body or to help defend us from bacteria and viruses. They can even become more of themselves, more stem cells, and carry on this process. It's all part of creating a complex human being. Well, I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you later.